In this video article, we're going to have a look at how James Jamerson introduced the front-end, back-end concept to rock and pop bass. And this is a concept that you really need to know if you want to create more dynamic lines, and especially if you want to go from lines with 8th note rhythms to lines with 16th note rhythms. You'll undoubtedly need to be playing devices on either the front end or the back end of the bar, and then using rhythmic replacement to create that 16th note feel. Okay, before we get started, here is a screenshot of my Amazon author page. It is early September 2025. Currently I have 27 books available on Amazon. I've got another 2 or 3 in the works, so that will soon be more. The book that's most germane to this video is going to be Learning from James Jamerson Volume 1. So you can head over to Amazon, Google or search Paul Wolf Learning from James Jamerson Volume 1, have a look at that, read the reviews. That will tell you a lot about my teaching, kind of materials that I teach to students, and how they find that experience. So let's jump into the video. Now this one came because I did a video recently called How Bass Lines Can Be Played at Different Rhythmic Levels, and I got an email from one of my students, a guy in Canada called Jeff, asking if I could go into more detail on the concept of playing on the front end and the back end of the bars. And what that means is you play a device in 8th notes on beats 1 and 2, that's the front end of the bar, and then you play a device in 8th notes on beat 3 and 4, a different device, and that's the back end of the bar. And this, like many things, was a concept that James Jamerson introduced to rock and pop bass. I have a phrase that I use with students, which is when you're exploring and trying to identify where certain ideas came from, all roads on the bass pretty much lead to Jamerson and McCartney. And obviously that doesn't apply to things like slap and tap and all those kind of advanced stylistic techniques that people like Larry Graham, Stanley Clarke, Marcus Miller, etc. brought to rock and pop. But if you're looking at anything to do with kind of fingerstyle playing, most of that, like 95% of it, the roots are Jamerson and McCartney. So let's dig a little deeper. First of all, here's an example. Now this is a stylistic Jamerson example, and this is to chord progression that's similar in parts to the Isley Brothers song, This Old Heart of Mine, and this is a typical front end, back end bass line. I'm not going to go into the detail of this just yet, but what I want to do is just play this to you. There's on the next screen there's a video. It's about 130 beats per minute, and you can hear how dynamic the line is. And what I should have done is created a line where it was a more traditional 8th note line, where a device is conceived in quarter notes and then played in 8th notes. But this, what you'll hear when you listen to it, is how much harmonic movement there is in the bass line, even though this is actually a pretty simple bass line in terms of what devices are being used. Lots of 8ths and lower 5ths, root 5th octave, ideas like that. Nothing very dynamic here or sophisticated in terms of what actual devices are being used, but because of the using a different 8th device at an 8th note level on beats 1 and 2 and then a different one on beats 3 and 4, it creates a much more dynamic effect. So let's have a listen to this. Let me press play. And one other thing that was going on in that line, on some of the earlier bars, what was happening was there was a device that finished on the root note on beats 1 and 2, and then a device that started on the root note in beat 3 and 4. And what happened was those two notes, the last note of the device on beats 1 and 2 and the first note of the device on beats 3 and 4, are tied together. That's called overlapping, and that creates its own little subtle effect that you'll be familiar with from lots of Jamerson lines in the mid-60s, kind of 65 I'm saying. So what we're going to do is I'm going to detail this in a bit more depth so you can understand fully how this came about. This is a chord progression similar to the chorus of Get Ready by the Temptations, and as you can see, it's just played completely in root notes. So let's just have a quick listen to that so you can familiarize it. So it's a simple chord progression where the chords just change every bar, and it'd be really easy and straightforward to create a bass line where it's done so it's done on like a quarter note level, and you can add some eighth note rhythms into it, but where the harmonic movement in the bass line is quite slow. And at this kind of time period with Jamerson in Motown, he was looking for ways to make his bass lines more dynamic, and this would be like a stylistic bass line on those chord changes. And I've annotated everything out so you can see the kind of devices that are being used. And again, these are simple devices. You've got, like in the first bar, you've got root, root, 5, root on beats 1 and 2, and then you've got root, root, 2, 3 on beats 3 and 4. Really, really simple, basic devices. And if you look through all of this, you can pause the video and have a look at the devices being used. There's nothing in here that is sophisticated or advanced. These are all foundational, basic devices. But because Jamerson's put them together in this way, with two devices to a bar, it creates a lot of dynamic movement. And I've got a video of this so you can hear it in a second. Before I go to that video, I just want to point out that what he's tending to do here as a pointer, a breaking down of his lines, the devices on the front end of the bar, which is beats 1 and beats 2, remember, tend to be some kind of combination of root and fifth, or 8 and fifth, which is the octave in the lower fifth, or the root note above the fifth. In bar 5, there's an 8-5 root, so he's using a slightly more complex version of that. Root 5-8-5 is a common device in early kind of 60s bass lines, and a foundational device because it works with every quality of chord because there's no thirds there. And then what he's tending to do on bar beats 3 and 4 is create a device that goes from the root or the octave. When you see 8, all that means is it's the root note being played above the next notes of the device, but he's creating a device that goes from the root and leads the listener's ear to the next root note. So if we look at beats 3 and 4 of bar 1, root, root, 2, 3, that takes us straight to the B flat, the downbeat of bar 2. If we look at beats 3 and 4 of bar 2, we've got an 8-8-7-5, which will take us down to the low F, which is the lower scalar approach to the root of G minor on bar 3. Also note, if you play that 8-8-7-5, that the 7 is A, and he might have played that because it was an open string. He favoured lots of open strings, but that A and the F create an upper scalar, lower scalar, indirect resolution to the G. So even in a basic bass line, there's a sophisticated piece of bassline creation happening there. And if you, again, you can pause and look through and look at the connections, how they're being made. They're all very straightforward, very standard connections, lower chromatic approaches, scalar approaches, and it's all done in a way that sounds really logical to the ear. But because the connectors are combined with the devices on the first two beats of the bar, which kind of outline the harmony in very broad brush strokes, roots and fifths, eighths and fifths, sometimes 8/5 root. That combined then with the connector creates this great sense of harmonic movement in the bass line. So let's listen to that example. And that chord that we finished on was the first chord of the next section. This comes from was excerpted from a longer tutorial, but that should give you an idea of how this front end, back end of the bar concept works. In the next slide, let's click over to it. Here we've got an example which really, I think, helps you understand and spell it out, and how it cross references back to walking bass. So what I've done here is I've expanded each chord change out to 2 bars. So this is now a slightly longer progression. I've just taken the first 4 bars of the previous example, and what I've done is turned each of those 8th note devices into a 4-note device over 4 beats of the bar. So what you can think of as the front end of the bar happens on bars 1, 3, 5 and 7 in this example, and then obviously the back end of the bar is bars 2, 4, 6 and 8. And again, this gives you a chance to look at what Jamerson's doing in terms of how he's structuring these lines. And remember, these are based on stylistic examples. For copyright reasons, I haven't used an identical or a transcribed piece of Jamerson's bass line from Get Ready, but what I've done is combine different ideas from different sections of the song to give us this flavour of what he's doing. But you can see that the devices are really, really simple that he uses to connect: root, root 2, flat 3 in the G minor bar, bar 6, root, root 2, 3 in the C bar, which will take us back to F at the octave level in bar 8. So it's really simple, and this would be like a really basic level of walking bass. But I think this was Jamerson experimenting with how he could bring jazz concepts into this pop playing that he was doing at Motown. Because remember, if you read it, or if you read any of the stories about Jamerson, any of the interviews that were done with his son, James Jamerson Jr., and his son always said that there were very few songs that Jamerson came back from Motown and said, "Oh, I recorded this and it was really cool." And he just viewed this as a gig, and it was a really well-paying gig. But he was a jazz musician at heart. He played 5, 6, 7 nights a week in the Detroit jazz clubs. And what he wanted to do, there's a Berry Gordy, and I've forgotten the name of the book. There's an autobiography of Berry Gordy, and he references Jamerson several times in that book. And he said when he was conducting sessions, he had to keep a closer eye on Jamerson because he was always trying to sneak in little jazzy things just to make it more interesting for himself. So this, I think, and Get Ready is probably the earliest example that I've seen, was Jamerson experimenting to see how he could bring some more interest and walking bass concepts to these bass lines that he was playing on these Motown songs. So let's have a listen to that, done with a jazzy style backing track. Now, as a walking bass line, we'd probably vary that up a bit. There's probably a bit too much root notes happening in there, but as an example of how this concept probably came about, and I'm kind of making educated guesses here, but the reason I think I'm on the right lines is that there are so many examples of walking bass ideas found throughout Jamerson's vocabulary. If you analyze transcriptions of his work, I've got all the published transcriptions, and I've got about another 150 in my library of transcriptions that I've analyzed in detail, and the amount of times he uses concepts that you can only understand if you have a detailed knowledge of walking bass is too many for it to be coincidence. So I think this is how the kind of the front end of the bar, back end of the bar concept came about. And what it does, it enables you to create harmonically denser bass lines without going a rhythmic level down and playing 16th notes. But you need to understand this level of creating bass lines to play effective notes with bass lines rather with 16th note rhythms. So if you're not sure about anything to do with that, go back, watch the video over, you leave a comment or drop me an email, and I'll answer and try and explain more if you need more. Closing out, as I said, understanding how you use devices at an 8th note level and on the front end and the back end of the bar is critical to creating more dynamic lines. Now, there are some genres where you don't need to, some simple country style lines you don't need to, some blues rock lines you don't need to, but anything beyond kind of those genres and very basic eighth note rock, you do need to understand this concept and how to use it. And especially if you want to use rhythmic replacement to create stage 1 16th note lines, you'll need to understand this concept in detail to create lines at an eighth note level and then layer on the rhythmic replacement. There's more on all of these concepts in my Learning from James Jamerson series, and perhaps the one to start with, and this lesson was excerpted from this book, is How to Play Bass, Learning from James Jamerson Volume 1. You can find this on your local Amazon. It's my best-selling book. It's got about 325 reviews, which for a niche as small and as it's in the bottom 10% of niches on Amazon. So bass books don't sell that much. And Amazon's normal statistics are you normally get 2 or 3 reviews per 1,000 sales. So on that metric, I should have 170,000 sales of this book. I can tell you I don't have anything like that. So that tells you another story in and of itself, in that this book gets reviewed at much higher levels than is the normal for Amazon. If you purchase a new copy and send me a copy of your invoice, then there's an accompanying online web version. It's totally free, provided you meet the criteria of buying it new on Amazon and sending me a copy of that invoice, and that's got all the examples played, and most of the examples that you saw in this video were edited down from the examples that are with the online version. There's also some bonus lessons as well, and there's MP3 tracks to download. There's loads of stuff, so do go and check that out. Thank you for your time with this video, and I'll catch you in the next video.